The Pacific Northwest Trail is a 1,200-mile-long backpacking route that stretches east-west from the edge of Glacier National Park in the state of Montana to Cape Alava on the coast of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state. In 2022, the Pacific Northwest Trail was an evolving assemblage of trails old and new, roads paved, unpaved, and overgrown, as well as short stretches of cross-country travel that could be connected to create a continuous journey against the grain of the Pacific Northwest. I had made a pretty late decision to hike the Pacific Northwest Trail. In January, I left a job of 6 years in the video game industry to focus on my artwork full-time. I wanted to ground myself for that by connecting to the world. This trail was a chance to dig into the history and present reality of my own home and life. It was originally conceived of by Ron Strickland in the 1970s, with the poetic theme of following a drop of rain falling on the west side of the Continental Divide in the Rocky Mountains, all the way to its journey's end, the Pacific Ocean. I trained my legs and troubleshooted sustainable ways to carry my last extravagant purchase after leaving the world of reliable income, 4 or 5 pounds of brand new camera gear I would use to document my journey and explore the worlds of the Pacific Northwest Trail visually. I did all the research I could on 2 of my favorite subjects to consider while hiking: native history and geology. I would be hiking alone, but my partner Justine agreed to drive with me out to the start of the trail. So we made a road trip of it, from our home in Seattle, Washington to Glacier National Park in Montana. Here's our campground at Apgar. It's quite hot, but unfortunately there is a ton of snow in the park still. It's, looking like it'll be possible, but interesting going over Stony Indian Pass, which is, they've only had one successful person report back that they made it through so far. And I have my ice axe, so we'll see what permit I am able to get tomorrow morning. Last night we saw a talk by Vernon Finley as part of the National Park Service programs, the campfire programs, at the amphitheater at Apgar Campground. And he gave a really amazing overview of all the different acts that the government has enacted over the past century that have had dramatic effects on Native Americans and Indian peoples in the U.S. And he told the creation story of the Kootenai people, and Vernon told us about how everything has a song, everything has a spirit, and everything has a song. There's the bird song, but then there's the song underneath the song. Certain people might hear certain songs. I went out and sat by the amphitheater, looking out over Lake McDonald and the peaks in the distance with some coffee and coffee cake. And after sitting there for a while, just the sound of the wind going through the trees and the sounds of the waves of the water lapping at the shore were really quite beautiful. And it made me so thankful to be here. So I couldn't be more excited. Glacier National Park was established in 1910, pushing out the Blackfeet to the east and the Kootenays to the west, whose historic territories once divided what is now the park. The mountains in Glacier hold spiritual sites of deep importance in history for both tribes. These places with abundant game only grew in importance as the bison were forced by white settlers to the edge of extinction. Many of the trails across the Rocky Mountains that the PNT follows were traveled by the Kootenays, the Blackfeet, and other nearby tribes to hunt game and gather plants seasonally. Trails were also used seasonally by tribes to cross the mountains in large parties to hunt bison on the plains before returning west. Each tribe has their own customs, practices, seasonal rounds, beliefs, and cultures, but many groups once shared a reliance on bison. The U.S. government, which sought to extract all the land it could from tribes as its settlers spread further and further west, knew this, and so eventually waged war on the bison to deplete and destroy the Indians' livelihood. If not for the actions of Atatiche and his son Tlatati of the Pend Oreille, the bison might have been completely eradicated in America. Atatiche had a vision of returning bison to the prairies they once roamed in the Flathead Reservation. His son carried this vision out, taking 6 orphaned bison calves across the Rocky Mountains to live there. These bison were sold by Tlatati's stepfather after Atatiche had passed, but thankfully some of the new owners kept the vision of a restored bison population alive. The Flathead Reservation, and so many other reservations in the country, were vivisected by the 1887 Dawes, or General Allotment Act, which split native land, promised in treaties to them, into parcels, which were then sold to outsiders after an initial group of parcels had been assigned to tribal members. Only in December 2020 was an ongoing legal effort to restore the bison range to tribal management at last successful. Justine and I visited Browning, Montana, on the Blackfeet Reservation that sits directly east of the park. The Museum of the Plains Indian in Browning has some interesting displays and a generous collection of Blackfeet cultural objects and clothing to see. The Blackfeet Trading Post has a great collection of crafts, goods, and books available nearby as well. Chief Mountain stands prominently forward from the rest of the nearby mountains on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains at the edge of the Great Plains. It is an ancient Precambrian remnant of rock that slid out on a thrust fault above much younger rock before the rest of the layer eroded away. Chief Mountain in the stories of the Blackfeet is the home of the Thunderbird and a place where people have received important visions. It is a truly special place, and I was thrilled to see its face come slowly out of the clouds as we made our way to where the Pacific Northwest Trail begins. All right, the start of the PNT. I just said bye to Justine. There she is. And I'll see her again at Medellin Falls. Bye, dear. I love you. Mwah. Fuck. It's really tough to say goodbye to Justine. Here with Ketchup. It's the first water break for me of the PNT. This trip I'm using the Katadyn B-Free filters. We were just talking about our strategies. We're both a fan of the gravity filter, but I'm going to try this guy out and see how it goes. Grabbing and going, since there's so much water on this trail. For most of it anyways. From the PNT's eastern terminus at Chief Mountain, heading west takes you down the Belly River on the Belly River Trail, past Cosley Lake, and then past Glens Lake. One hiker at a time, the sign says. Hikers on the Pacific Northwest Trail have to be very bear aware. The trail overlaps with grizzly bear territory for all of its duration in Montana, Idaho, and the first part of Washington. Proper food storage is the most important thing for hikers to keep in mind. And of course, it's also wise to carry bear spray. At the foot of Glens Lake, Mokawani's Junction Camp is where I spent my first night on the Pacific Northwest Trail. Almost boiling. First dinner on the PNT. It's gonna be tasty, tasty ramen. The mosquitoes here are pretty horrendous, I will say that. As my noodles finished cooking, I realized a horrible truth. I had forgotten to bring any kind of eating utensil. This was the solution. Tent stake chopsticks. Well, here we are on day 2. And today, headed up Stony Indian Pass. It's been a very, very big snow year. So there was a guy who goes up and does this pass a lot of times. He's done it 8 or 9 times. He slid on a snowfield yesterday and is having to go back out. So, pretty concerned, but I have an ice axe in Glacier National Park. These friggin' gorgeous mountains. Heading up through the forest between the epic Pyramid Cathedral and Stony Indian Peaks, the PNT took us along the Mokawanis River, past Atsina Lake and Falls. Ketchup and I heading up towards Stony Indian Pass. This amazing waterfall. Look at that. Cascading over all the sedimentary steps and layers. Thought we didn't want it to be too icy, but now I kind of wish it was a little icier. All right, here's the first blowdown of the PNT. I'm hoping it's going to be the only one. It's a pretty small little guy. Thankfully, as we headed further and further up towards Stony Indian Pass, the snow was not as bad as we had feared it might be. Before the final switchbacks, we took a rest at a beautiful seasonal lake, glimmering beneath Cathedral Peak, Wachichi Mountain, and Mount Kip in the distance. The Stoney Nakoda First Nation got their name from their practice of using fire-warmed rocks to heat their food. Stoney Nakoda people came south into what is now Glacier National Park in order to hunt. It's for these people that the Stony Indian Pass is named. Today, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation has 3 bands on 3 reserves in Canada of a few thousand members each. All right, We made it to the top of Stony Indian, and now we just have to get down.
Right on. Yeah, I don't know how to get down.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Well, trying to skirt this cliff around because in this lake, that side also skirts the sheer cliff. Fuck me. That is what I just walked across. Don't ask me where, instead of going on that side where the trail is. Oh, it was probably a mistake, but we made it. Well, except for maybe a bushwhack or two here. Wow, that was quite the friggin' path. I am so glad to be off that snow, and actually more glad to be off that cliff. Following the PNT west from Stony Indian Pass, you get some tantalizing views of Porcupine Ridge in the distance. Next, the trail heads down Pass Creek to the Waterton Valley, which has the Waterton River and Kootenai Lake Campground and lakes. But I didn't really know that those were there since the trail goes through overgrown brush and forest most of the way, all the way north to Waterton Lake. So much of backpacking turns out to be short-term amnesia. I'm going through all the brush. Butterflies keep flying past. It's just such a cavalcade of experiences. Everything changes so much. The way it fractures life into little moments and struggles that sort of take over your whole mind one after the other. Whew. It is pretty crazy to be going through truly what feels like the middle of nowhere, and then to find yourself at the Goat Haunt Ranger Station. The ranger station at Waterton Lake was not in service when I arrived, but the lake still made a wonderful spot to stop and have lunch before continuing west. Here's the bridge across Waterton River. Yowza. Woo. Pretty wobbly. I'm so glad that's there. My gosh. I think last year people had to wait for the bridge to get put in. So I'm just 3.4 miles from the international boundary with Canada. So that's pretty cool. Today has been freaking killer. Going over Stony Indian in that amount of snow. And then now I still have 5.8 to go to Lake Francis. It's tough stuff. From Waterton Lake, the trail heads between Ulsan Mountain and Shahia Peak to the north, and the Citadel Peaks and Porcupine Ridge to the south. First you reach Lake Janet, where Ketchup had his permit to stay, and then Lake Francis, where I had my permit to stay for the night. After a long day like that, food makes all the difference in the world. I'm gonna have this ramen, and then I'm gonna have these fruit balls. I think that should be okay. There are tons of mosquitoes here, but I tried a little technique where I took my shirt off and then vigorously washed myself so that I could put on the other lightweight shirt that I have and then put on my mosquito-proof thing, so that way I wouldn't be miserably overheating as I tried to relax to make dinner, and it worked pretty well. Day 2 on the PNT. Pretty serious. Oh man. From my campsite at Lake Francis in the morning, I went out to the lake itself to look across to the Sentinel, which houses the Dixon Glacier, and amazingly, a waterfall that heads downhill from Dixon Glacier over what looks like almost 2,000 feet of vertical drop. Wow, yeah. Lake Francis was probably the most beautiful campsite I've ever had. Huge, huge, maybe tallest cascading waterfall I've ever seen. I don't know. Pretty awesome place to end up after a really tough day on the trail. Now I'm watching the light start to hit this massive cliff face. Everything here is so incomprehensible. I am leaving Lake Francis and heading up towards... Where am I heading up next? I don't know. But this is where I am. It's pretty insane. I'm pretty happy about it. Just passing Hawksbill Camp right now. Today, I'm gonna have a relatively chill day. Going up to Bowman Lake and camping down at the bottom end of the lake. I have a reservation for at the top end of the lake, but that would only be like a 10-mile day. But if it's super amazing, like it is here, up at the top end of the lake, then maybe I will stay there. Day 3 of the PNT, pretty exciting. Past the Hawksbill and Thunderbird Creek, the PNT cuts uphill to Brown Pass, nestled between Chapman Peak to the north and Thunderbird Mountain to the south. Made it up to Brown Pass. Just 6.7 till my designated campsite. Man, look at that sheer cliff. Brown Pass is gorgeous. Truly gorgeous. At Brown Pass, there is a junction where you could head on a more northerly route that the PNT was originally designed to follow, but this route leads through Boulder Pass, which would be another difficult snowy pass, and to a river crossing, which is basically considered dangerous until near the end of the summer season. So I followed what is now the primary route towards Bowman Lake, southwest via Bowman Creek. The scenery in this section continued to be out of this world gorgeous, with hanging valleys, cascading waterfalls, massive cliffs of ancient sedimentary rock, and raging creeks full of snowmelt.
All right, that was my first ford where I had to get my feet wet. Thankfully, it's a sunny day. It feels good, honestly, right now. I just know there could be consequences later. Hopefully not. There's like mind-blowing views behind me, but I've got tons of brushy trail to get through. And it's a whole part of thru hiking is you're switching back and forth between admiring the place you're in and the sport of walking a really long ways.
After a few wet crossings of Bowman Creek, I found myself at the head of Bowman Lake, an ice-carved valley that leads out of the heart of the Rockies. The PNT follows Bowman Lake for 7 miles southwest and gave me one last chance to appreciate the intense beauty of this place.
It's been so many years since I've been out here. But still, in all those years, I still lived, hung out with game developers. I traveled so many places with Justine. And with her, I did love the world. And I did see new things, new parts of it with her. And we both went through tough times. Her maybe more than me, maybe a lot more than me. And I changed as a person because of Justine, because of her, into what I am now. Trying to find a path. It's beginning to hit me that I'm kind of walking out of Glacier. Such an insanely beautiful section. And I'm going to go to the outside of the MPS campground at the foot of the lake. My legs are pretty tired though. I should not go further than that today. I had lots of really meaningful thoughts today. I mean, I didn't come here to like figure out my life, but there is kind of something I needed to figure out, and I'm hoping that I did that. I'm hoping I did that more today. All right, made it to the campground at the foot of the lake. People are boating, hear voices. Exciting. Well, here's our picnic table, Ketchup and I, at the Bowman Lake campground. The full civilized campground with running water, all that good stuff. Starting the road walk to Pole Bridge in the morning. Mosquitoes were super awful. Now rain is starting. Road walking, rain, mosquitoes. Time for a different part of the PNT.
Strangely enough, leaving Glacier, I actually felt a kind of relief, because I think as a photographer, going through such incredibly beautiful places is a bit all-consuming as you try to do any sort of justice to what's around you. But walking on a dirt road as the sun rises, I felt more at ease, knowing that most of my journey would be one of far more subtlety, a somehow more attainable beauty.
I am pretty psyched to have this umbrella right now, that's for sure, on the road to Pole Bridge.
Pole Bridge is an off-grid community that houses a saloon, bakery, and hostel, all of which are excellent places to rest, recover, and feast for a thru-hiker. Given the unhospitable weather, I sought shelter at the North Fork Hostel, run by a lovely man named Oliver. I got cleaned up and spent the night. Unfortunately, my stomach is not cooperating. I have not had a bowel movement in about 4 days. So hopefully I will just rest and relax here until that's resolved. And yeah, I mean, it's a good place to do so.
Sweet dreams.
And by the next day, thankfully, my stomach problems were alleviated, and I was ready to head out on the next leg of the Pacific Northwest Trail, Pole Bridge to Eureka.